Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. Working the night shift in an office building feels like stepping into another world. During the day, it's buzzing with life. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, people chatting by the water cooler. But at night, it transforms into something else entirely. It's dead quiet, except for the hum of the vending machines and the occasional creak of the old heating system. I like the solitude though. Most nights, it was just me and the janitors working a couple of floors below. The quiet gave me time to catch up on reports, uninterrupted. But that night, the night I still dream about, I realized how much I had taken the silence for granted. It started around 1:30 a.m. I was halfway through a spreadsheet, the kind that makes your eyes glaze over, when I heard a knock. It was faint, almost polite, like someone lightly tapping their knuckles against the door. I looked up, startled. The sound had come from the conference room down the hall. At first, I didn't think much of it. The janitor sometimes checked to make sure the doors were locked, and the sound carried strangely in the empty building. I went back to work, but a few minutes later, the knock came again, louder this time. Sharp, insistent. I frowned and stood up. The hallway was dimly lit, illuminated only by the emergency exit signs and the faint glow of the streetlights outside. As I walked toward the conference room, I felt a strange tension in the air, like the building was holding its breath. The door to the conference room was closed, and the light inside was off. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see only darkness. But as I got closer, I heard it a whisper, soft, unintelligible murmurs, like someone having a conversation just out of earshot. "Hello," I called out, my voice breaking the silence. The whispering stopped. I stood frozen for a moment, my hand hovering over the door handle. Finally, I gathered the courage to push it open. The room was empty. The long table was spotless, chairs neatly arranged. Everything was as it should be, except for one thing. On the glass window facing the hallway, there were handprints. 5 of them, pressed into the glass, as though someone had leaned against it with both hands. The prints were fresh, smudged slightly, as if they'd been made seconds before I entered the room. My stomach dropped. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding, and returned to my office, locking the door behind me. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or maybe one of the janitors messing around. But then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. It read, "Don't go back there." I stared at the message, my pulse hammering in my ears. How could anyone have known I'd gone to the conference room? There were no cameras on this floor, no one else around. I grabbed my desk phone and dialed security. Frank, the guard on duty, answered after a couple of rings. "Yeah," he grumbled. "Did you just text me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Text you?" "No. Why?" There's something weird going on up here," I stammered. "Can you check the cameras?" Frank sighed like I'd woken him from a nap. "Sure. Hang tight." While I waited, I stared at the door to my office, half expecting it to burst open. The minutes dragged on until finally, Frank called back. "There's nothing on the cameras," he said. "No one's been up there but you. Maybe you're just tired." I wanted to argue, But what could I say? There were no cameras in the conference room, no proof of the handprints, the whispering, or the text. I thanked him and hung up, but I didn't feel reassured. The rest of the night was a blur. I tried to focus on work, but every noise made me jump. The clank of the HVAC system, the hum of the fridge in the break room. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message, but none came. When my shift finally ended, I practically ran to my car, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty parking garage. I didn't look back at the building as I drove away. The next day, I told my supervisor what had happened. He laughed it off, saying the building was old and creaky, full of drafts and odd acoustics. But when I asked the janitors if they'd been on my floor that night, they swore they hadn't. I haven't worked another night shift since. And sometimes, when I pass the building on my way home, I can't help but glance up at the conference room window. Most of the time, it's dark. But once, just once, I thought I saw someone standing there staring back at me. Story 2. Hospitals at night are a different kind of beast. The fluorescent lights hum a little louder, the hallways stretch longer, and the shadows seem to shift just outside the corner of your eye. That's the nature of night shifts, unsettling, eerie, and relentless. I used to think those feelings were just the price of working alone in the quiet hours. I don't think that anymore. It was a Tuesday, a slow night, the kind that feels more suffocating than peaceful. My station was on the 3rd floor, the least busy in our small hospital. Only a handful of patients occupied the rooms, most of them either deep in sleep or drugged up enough to stay quiet through the night. I was the only nurse on duty up there, just me and the muted beep of monitors for company. By 2:30 a.m., the monotony had settled in. My eyes burned from staring at charts, and my brain begged for caffeine. I decided to head to the break room for coffee. The hallway leading there always felt longer at night. It wasn't poorly lit, but something about the sterile brightness made it feel cold and endless, like walking through a tunnel that didn't want to let you out. I passed the stairwell on my way back, balancing a steaming mug in one hand and a clipboard in the other. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the bottom of the stairwell, directly beneath the bright emergency light. Her hospital gown hung loosely on her thin frame, and her long, dark hair cascaded forward, covering most of her face. She wasn't moving, just staring up at me, or at least that's what it felt like. "Ma'am," I called down, stopping dead in my tracks. "Are you okay?" No response. The silence felt louder than it should have. I took a hesitant step closer, peering over the railing. "Ma'am, do you need help?" I tried again, louder this time. She tilted her head slightly, the movement slow and deliberate, as if considering my question. That's when I noticed her feet, bare and pale, like she'd been walking on cold tile for hours. Something about her presence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I swallowed hard and started down the steps, one hand gripping the railing, the other clutching my mug like a lifeline. "Ma'am," I said again, my voice cracking this time. She turned then, not fully, just enough for her hair to part slightly, revealing a glimpse of her face. Her skin was grayish, her cheekbones sharp, and her eyes weren't there. Just hollow, dark sockets where they should have been. I froze, my legs locked in place, as a chill crawled up my spine. She didn't move, but somehow she disappeared. Not in the blinking you'll miss it way. She just wasn't there anymore. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I stumbled the rest of the way down the stairs, nearly spilling my coffee. I flung open the door she'd vanished through and stepped into the hallway. It was empty, completely empty. "Hello." My voice bounced off the walls, shaky and uncertain. There was no reply, just the quiet hum of the building. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and oppressive. I hurried back to my station, my steps quick and uneven, and sat down at my desk, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. The rest of the shift dragged on, every sound making me jump. When the morning staff arrived, I told one of the nurses about the woman in the stairwell. She checked the patient logs. No one was missing or unaccounted for. Everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be. Feeling a mix of embarrassment and paranoia, I asked the security guard to pull the footage from the cameras. He was happy to oblige, probably thinking it was just a bored nurse overthinking a late-night shadow. When we watched the footage, my blood ran cold. There I was, walking down the hallway with my coffee. I paused at the stairwell, glanced down, and spoke, but there was no one there. The guard looked at me, his brow furrowed. "You said she was standing at the bottom of the stairs?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Look at this," he said, rewinding the footage. "Watch your shadow." He played it back in slow motion. My shadow stretched down the stairs, but it wasn't alone. For a brief moment, there was another shadow next to mine. It was faint but unmistakable, taller than me, with hair that fell past its shoulders. The shadow lingered for a few seconds after I walked away, then vanished. I didn't say anything as the guard replayed it again, this time pausing on the shadow. My stomach twisted into knots, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "Looks like you had company," the guard said with a nervous laugh. "I haven't walked past that stairwell since. I take the long way around now, even when it's inconvenient. Some things aren't worth risking, and I'm not interested in meeting her again. But sometimes late at night, I still feel like someone's watching me." Story 3. I started working the night shift at the warehouse because it paid better than the day shift, and I thought the quiet would suit me. I like the idea of working alone, away from the chatter and petty dramas that filled the daytime hours. The warehouse was massive, rows and rows of tall shelves packed with pallets and crates. At night, under the dim, yellow-tinted overhead lights, it felt more like a cavern than a workplace. I'd been there about 3 months when it happened. The first 2 months were uneventful, almost dull. I'd show up, clock in, and spend the night moving boxes, scanning barcodes, and organizing shipments for the morning crew. It was repetitive, sure, but I liked the rhythm of it. There was something satisfying about stacking crates just right, fitting them together like puzzle pieces. But the warehouse had its quirks. Sometimes, I'd hear things, a faint clang like something falling over or the echo of footsteps. I'd chalk it up to the building settling or a stray rat scurrying across the concrete floor. It wasn't unusual to feel like you were being watched. Big, empty spaces can do that to your brain, I figured. You start imagining things. That night started like any other. I was in the back of the warehouse, where the shelves loomed like towering shadows. My cart was piled high with boxes, and I was sorting through them, double-checking labels. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights and the faint whir of the ventilation system. Then I saw it. A shadow darted across the aisle, just at the edge of my vision. It was quick, so quick I almost doubted I'd seen it at all. But I knew I had. It was the kind of movement your instincts register before your brain has time to process. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "Who's there?" No answer. I waited, my pulse quickening. Maybe it was one of the other workers pulling a prank. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried to scare me. I shrugged it off and went back to my boxes, telling myself not to be so jumpy. A few minutes later, the motion detection lights started turning on. They were spaced out across the warehouse, and as I watched, one after another flickered to life, leading toward me like someone was walking down the aisle. But there was no one there. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. My voice sounded small in the cavernous space. Still nothing. I grabbed my box cutter. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. My heart was thudding in my chest now, loud enough that I wondered if I'd be able to hear anyone sneaking up on me over the sound of it. The lights kept flickering closer, one by one, until they stopped about 10 feet away. I strained my ears, listening for any sound, a footstep, a shuffle, anything. And that's when I heard the breathing. It was deep and raspy, like someone struggling to draw air through a throat clogged with gravel. The sound was so close I could feel it, warm and damp against the back of my neck. I spun around, slashing the box cutter through the air. There was nothing there, but the breathing didn't stop. It moved, circling me, coming from my left, then my right, then behind me again. I stumbled back, my chest tightening with panic. I swung the box cutter wildly, the blade catching the light with each frantic arc. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" No answer, just that relentless, labored breathing. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The lights around me flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the aisle into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling so badly it took me 3 tries to switch it on. When the beam of light finally cut through the shadows, the aisle was empty. But something was wrong. The boxes I'd been sorting were scattered across the floor, and the crate I'd been stacking was gouged with deep, jagged scratches. They looked deliberate, like claw marks. I backed away slowly, my flashlight sweeping over the shelves. I half expected to see something, someone lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the scratches, etched into the wood like a warning. I didn't bother finishing my shift. I left the boxes where they were and walked out, my hands still gripping the box cutter like a lifeline. The next morning, I told my supervisor I was done. I didn't explain why, and he didn't ask. Maybe he'd seen it too. Maybe everyone had, and that's why no one stayed on the night shift for long. I don't know what I saw or heard that night. I don't want to know. But sometimes late at night, I think about the breathing, about the way it circled me, invisible but so real. And I wonder if it followed me home,